Welcome to Getting Rich Together, the show for successful women who are looking to take their financial futures to the next level. I'm your host, Shama Bunton. When I started my wealth building journey, nobody knocked on my door to give me all the answers. So I want to talk to the experts who've done it and bring the answers to you so we can discover the right opportunities that will help us achieve the financial futures we've always dreamed of together and have fun doing it. So let's dive into this episode and start getting rich together. It's our birthday. It's our birthday. It's our birthday. Happy birthday, Getting Rich Together. Friends, it's been a little over a year since we launched Getting Rich Together. Something that honestly, I just had no idea what it was going to be like, how it was going to feel, and ultimately the impact that we would create together. This entire platform has been about all of us. Back when I first had the inclination to start a podcast, it was really in the winter of 2023. I had spent 5 years having conversations with women, really stemming out of my divorce, curious to know how people were building wealth, how they were investing, what they were doing, and eager to meet and find wealth expanders. That journey to meet women led me to realizing that these conversations were not ones that were only intended for me, were not ones that only I was eager to hear about, but was something that we all wanted, something that we deserved, and something that didn't exist. So in the beginning stages of starting Getting Rich Together, as I'm sure many of you guys feel when you are starting something new, I had tons of fears. I wondered, would anyone care? Would anyone listen? Did this topic even matter? And these other ways of looking at money and looking about our stories and our journeys, would it resonate? Because up until now, all the conversations that are out there around money have really been around tactical, strategic, here's what to do, here's what not to do, or it's been largely on the spiritual, esoteric mindset. Here's how to think, here's what not to think, stop doing that, you're ruining it with your thoughts. But there really has yet to be a place where stories were center stage and lived experiences were what was at the center of the conversation. And that is what we've done together at Getting Rich Together. Now, this past year has been remarkable. It has been an opportunity for me to find my voice, a space for me to come out boldly and to be able to say what I believe is to be the future of how we want this world, which is a place where we get to create from our own visions, where we get to be inspired from the people around us to realize possibility and potentialities. One of the things that's been so exciting about this show has been the opportunity for women to see themselves in each other, for the women who I interview to have their greatness shown in front of them, to consistently hear things where they end the conversation thinking of, Shama, I had no idea I was going to share that with you. I had no idea I would feel so comfortable to talk about these stories that maybe I haven't thought of in 30, 40, or 50 years. And what's also incredible has been able to have them see the impact that they have on other women. There have been women on this show who've never been on stages, who never knew that their stories were important or that they mattered. And those are the stories that I think have been so impactful, because it's not just, how did I build this business and make $1 billion? It's how did I feel and what were the ways in which I approached these challenges, these successes, the ways in which I internalized these things and made the next best decision for myself. I believe that all of our wisdom gets to be unlocked. And the show is so valuable to me. And not because it's about me, it's because it's about you and us to be able to really move forward with our collective consciousness. And that is what Getting Rich Together is about. Over the last year, we've had women who have built wealth, through entrepreneurial successes, have been corporate powerhouses, have started multiple different businesses, who picked up and moved clear across the country to follow their dreams, who've married into wealth, who've inherited wealth, all of it. And what's been so impactful about all these stories is quite simply the fact that they are divergent, that they are a broad spectrum, because our lived experiences are a broad spectrum, and we all deserve to be seen. This past year, I stepped into my genius as a catalyst. This has been one of the most incredible uncoverings of who I am and my purpose on this planet. And I feel so grateful to be able to announce that and say that. This role of being a catalyst is something that I had no idea was possible. Last year, in January of 2024, my husband and business partner, John, we sat down and did an exercise around the Zone of Genius by Gay Hendricks. And it's part of his book, The Big Leap. And what was so interesting about this is coming out of the exercise, I said, wow, I really want to ask the deep questions. I want to create impact such that people are unlocking themselves. I want to hold space. I want to facilitate. And yet, I want others to be able to unlock their own wisdom, to be their own guru, and to be able to do that within the space of being able to be inspired from others and to be able to inspire others. At the end of that exercise, I was left with this profound feeling that I had struck on something that was bigger than me, and that was something that I cognitively had no idea how on earth it would happen. I mean, have you ever heard of someone whose job is to hold space and to be a vibe setter? What kind of job is that? What kind of contribution to the world does that lead to? And I was curious and I was scared. And yet I knew that this was a calling and that this work was being drawn out of me, despite any sort of cognitive scarcity or fears around it. And so I charged forward. January of 2024, I said, all right, this is the path. And I started recording interviews. Now, the first interviews that I recorded, it's really interesting. I kept telling women, I just want to share your stories. And a lot of the time, women would come on or assume or anticipate that this would be talking about their work, talking about the things that they do for a living and how they make their money. But really, this was a much deeper conversation than that. As you guys have noticed, all of our conversations start off with, what was life like for you as a little girl? And I think that's so beautiful to stop and consider and ponder, because who we are and where we came from undoubtedly shapes the myriad of choices and possibilities and the decisions that we make. And we never truly know when we see someone on LinkedIn what their story is really about. What were their fears, how painfully similar we are, rather than how disparate we look on paper. We are all just so painfully similar. So the first guests that I had on the show before it even aired were in for a real treat, because they had no idea what was going to transpire. And quite frankly, I wasn't sure either. I never had a formal list of questions. I never really prepped anyone because I didn't believe there was anything to prep on if you're sharing your life story. And yet everyone kept saying yes. And that really told me that the universe was behind my back and had me. And so I pressed on. As the show unfolded in April of 2024, and I had given this talk at South by Southwest just right as it was launching, just right before. It was so fun and exciting because I knew that by having this big announcement that maybe a lot of people wouldn't care, maybe some would, but it was so important for me to say, you know what? I don't know what this is, and the world doesn't know what it is, but there are stages and places that are wanting and welcoming this conversation. And I may not have the visibility, but I have the intuition. And that has allowed me to keep moving forward. So the show opens. It's April 2024. I'm sitting down. I'm figuring out the sequencing of the episodes. Who do I want to have when? What does it look like? Building up this incredible content library of incredible women. And it just keeps flowing. There's a lot of uncertainty. How are people responding? What's the initial feedback? And the momentum, my friends, it grew. All of a sudden, people started leaving reviews. People started writing me and telling me, wow, this show is helping me realize that I'm not alone, that this doesn't have to be scary. And I think one of my favorite reviews was someone who wrote me and said, it feels like I'm listening to all of my rich aunties. I had someone the other day tell me, I forward this on to my daughter. She's in college. I want her to just see and feel the realities of these things. So that has been some of the early response and feedback. Over the summer, I started leveraging the podcast and this platform to be on more stages and to talk more, and not to be out there giving people financial advice. There's already enough of that. No one else needs to be told more what to do or what not to do. But I started to share stories around my own exploration of my values, what my money meant to me, what my time meant to me. And really the stories that took me from my divorce in 2019 to then being able to talk about my own personal self-inquisition and how my capital has really helped me take ownership over not only my life, but what I think is possible and the impact that I can have in the world. So that was really the first few months of the show, was practicing, right? Sharing the stories, being on stages, and hearing from more and more women in these salon-style environments. Come August, John and I were sitting down. We had just received, I think it was like, I don't know, 600 5-star reviews on Spotify, something ridiculous like that. And we're sitting down and he's like, Shama, there is something here. There is a ecosystem. There is an impact that you are making, and this deserves to be something bigger than just the show. Of course, I was scared. Up until that point, friends, I had run and launched multiple businesses. I had an agency that was very successful. I was building businesses around the world for clients. I really nailed what it looked like to launch a company and see it to revenue generating and cash flow positivity. I launched another business with an ex-co-founder and scaled that from 0 to 3 million in 6 months. I was so focused on these very, let's call them basic business models. I had never done anything like this. Build a podcast, think about what it looks like to create community ecosystems, what it looks like to inspire from within, to be self-loved and self-accepted. What did those things look like, and how was my vision of myself changing in the world? So John, once again, inspired and stoked a new fire, which was what we're doing, what you're doing, Shama, is something that is so much more powerful. What else is there? Last year in the summer, John became my formal business partner at Big Delta Capital. Up until that point, I'd really had Big Delta as a vehicle for me to do some investing. And it was really an entity that I had held in my heart, but hadn't really actively built properties around. And we decided to sit down and build out what this ecosystem looks like. What were the issues? What were the things that we were seeing in the world? And what was our vision of the world? And another really big download came in August of 2024. And that download was and is the vision of Big Delta Capital, which really seeks not only to obviously help women become wealthy, but it really seeks to close a confidence gap. It seeks to close the feeling from being unwhole to feeling whole. We all seek and want to find our wholeness. And what we have discovered is through this entry point of looking at our capital and looking at our values and looking at purpose and impact in the world, we can find a sense of wholeness within ourselves that is so unique to who we are that it has absolutely nothing to do with anyone else. And we are looking to help others find that sense of wholeness. Now, part of that ecosystem, you'll see it on the Big Delta Capital website, is around education, networks, and opportunities. Now, these were three components that I had found through the last 5 years of speaking to women, sharing my story, hearing their stories, were things that were really essential to what I believed, what we believe will really move the needle. Why is that? Up until now, education is something, when it comes to the world of money and finance, that's largely been done in a very one-dimensional way. Typically, you have teachers, you have students, you have a teacher who is an expert, someone whose job and education and schooling has been to know about these things, and they will sit down and tell you what to do and what not to do and why it works and why it doesn't work. And that's the traditional modalities of education. Also, a lot of the languaging around education, especially around money, has really been directed mostly to men. You know, the languaging that we've used from a marketing standpoint, right, communication standpoint, has not been geared towards women. In fact, the models of how we talk about things in many different fields of study have not evolved, right? And when it comes to something like your money, which, as many of you guys now know from listening to the show, women are inheriting $30 trillion. We're going to control over $50 trillion in the next 4 years. You know, there are so many different things that would point to not only a need of change in our education, but also a need to change in how we market and communicate. So education is a real big one. And what we've done at Big Delta Capital is look at education through the lens of how do we unlock wisdom from within each other? Many of you experienced this at the summit, where we had at each summit 140 women, each unlocking wisdom within themselves and each other. We catalyzed nearly 2,000 connections as a result of these events. And it was really around flipping education on its head. Instead of putting experts on stages, on keynotes, and let me tell you what to do, we had conversations that were deep. We unlocked our fears and we showed each other just how human we all are and the range of experiences that we've had. And that is how we chose to do education different. Lived experiences, not static and stale educational criteria to tell you what to do and ultimately to add that thing to your to-do list that has no emotional connection. So we're reframing what education looks like in that model. The next component we identified was around networks. This was a big one. When I started my journey, and many of you have heard the story now, but I sent an email out to 50 girlfriends and I asked them to talk to me about money. What were they doing with it? How were they investing it? What did it look like? Because in this really traumatic time period of divorce, I realized that I needed to re-look at how this was going to mean to me. I was a business owner. I had a cash flowing business, but I didn't understand other ways of investing my money outside of the basics. You know, you buy a house, you have a retirement account, but what else was available? 95% of those women I wrote did not want to talk to me about that. And that told me that my networks, while I loved them dearly, they were not emotionally and psychologically in a place to talk about some of these things that were deemed quite taboo. So I had to find new networks. And that required me putting myself in rooms and saying, I don't know this. Can I stand in my own power of being a successful CEO and founder and be able to tell someone who's also successful, I don't know this. Can you help me understand? Was I willing to have some humility? Was I willing to be open? And the answer is yes. And that is how I believe I was able to start to build these networks. And that is the framework that we use as we're building our Big Delta Capital networks, our Wealth Catalyst networks. because all the women who are participating in our community and our network are all successful. Everyone has inner wisdom. Everyone's unlocked something, and everyone looks great on LinkedIn. And yet, where do we go if we're so attached to the external? How do we actually unlock what's next and what's possible for us? And so that is where I believe the humility and the willingness to share, the willingness to learn is so important in the development of networks. Yes, networks can also be transactional. As the result of these summits, ladies, I now know that we are responsible for the movement of hundreds of thousands of dollars in capital that are changing hands between women and other businesses, funds, and organizations. We have started something so magical because we created the right climate for these networks to be real and authentic, and for women to be able to feel a sense of trust and safety. So networks are important. Now, obviously, the last one here is access to great opportunities. You'll hear a lot about this on lots of other incredible podcasts about not having access to opportunities. We all know the stories about 2% of venture capital goes to women founders. We know a lot of the stats around, how few women fund managers there are in the realm of venture capital, but also networks to other opportunities, right? How do you find out about great real estate syndicates? How do you find out about, great opportunities like finding a better new accountant or finding someone who's going to be able to help you plan for retirement, who you trust? So having access to great opportunities, I believe, stems from the right networks. But that is also a really core component of what John and I are building, right? So it's education, networks, and access to great opportunities. Now, as we're planning out, and this is still in this last year, planning out and saying, all right, what is our next big movement? What is the next thing that we're going to make happen? We decided to launch a summit, and not just one summit, but two. So in this last year of having the podcast, we not only have a podcast that now has 1,100 five-star reviews on Spotify, but we launched two summits when I think most of you might know that the biggest thing John and I had ever hosted before was Thanksgiving. So if you went to this, you'd be like, oh, you guys must be seasoned event producers. But no, this is our first time. And I have to say, by not being formal event producers, we actually created something far beyond what I believe formal event producers create, which is we created something with love, and we created something with heart, and we created something that was a full expression of who we are and the change and action we want to see happen in the world. And that is what we did. Now, it's been a really interesting last 9 months. Really put ourselves heads down into planning these summits. At first, we thought there would be incredible corporate sponsors who wouldn't want to get behind women and capital and growing their resources. But as it turns out, with the tides of the politics in our country changing and with things that have been evolving, getting corporations to sponsor something that was so bold, so new, and was quite challenging. And I realized at that moment, when John and I heard our 20th no, there was always oh, that's great, but the way things are right now, can you come back to us in a year? And I know lots of different people have suffered the consequences of changing political, but we certainly did as well. And so we had to say, okay, if we're really on our own with this, who is going to believe in this? And how are we going to be able to show that this is the new way in which we can convene and the new way in which we can create change? And so we had to say, all right, this is going to be based on our content. This is going to be based on the women we have in the room. And I am so eternally grateful to the women who said yes to being on stage and said yes to coming to the conference, who ultimately had no idea what it was going to be like. Just like the women who interviewed first for the show before the show was out, they had no idea what it was going to be like. And I have to tell you, the hardest thing for me was really holding steadfast in my vision and knowing that in this process of turning a thought to a thing, that I was going to really have to be clear on what that thing was. What was it going to look like? What were the feelings? What were the emotions? What were the outcomes that I wanted? There's a reason why this is the Wealth Catalyst Summit, and it's to catalyze the next step in the financial activation of your life, whatever that is, whether that is negotiating for points on a contract, or it is figuring out the next step in your real estate empire, or even figuring out how to buy a new business or buy a business or exit your startup. I mean, the next step means so many different things. And that was the goal. How do we really help women see the buffet of opportunities and inspire them to take the next step and let them know that your vision of the world is okay and you are okay. And your vision doesn't have to look like anyone else's. And honestly, it shouldn't. It should look like your unique vision and fingerprint. The summits came, they went, they were inspiring and juicy. And people kept asking me, what did it feel like afterward? Like, were you on such a high? Did you have a crash? What did it feel like? And I have to tell you, it felt right. During the day of the summit, I wasn't out socializing. I wasn't meeting everybody. I really kept inside of my inner space, staying really connected to my inner being. And I did what I was supposed to do, which was I asked questions. I held space. I created the vibe. And I was able to do so by staying very deeply connected to myself. So I wasn't socializing during the day. And at the end of the day, there was a deep sense of satisfaction that I was doing what I was supposed to do. This deep sense of satisfaction that my zones of genius, while I had no idea how I was ever going to make that happen, or what it would look like, or was it even possible, that it was. That I had done the hard work of getting close enough to myself and to my truth, and that I was able to hold the space and the faith to know that the things that were supposed to happen were going to transpire. And I stood there in witness of my own greatness, of my own ability to channel what was right and true for me. And so I don't feel like I'm on some big high after the summit. This summit and what we're doing it's not about me. It's not about John. It's about a calling for something that we all know we need. It's about being able to raise voices and ideas and opinions and to inspire things from within, and not in a top-down way. This isn't about what I think is right and what I think should be important to you. This is about helping all of us realize that we get to have our own things that are important to us, and we get to be liberated by the constructs of feeling shame and guilt and a lack of wholeness. We get to be whole again through coming home to ourselves. And now John and I are in the aftermath of opening up some massive doors and some big portals in this world. Who would have thought that money, confident, thinking about our capital, our power, thinking about how we're going to use our capital, that those would all be deeply philosophical, spiritual, emotional, and things that come closer to home and family and community than they do to things like maximizing capital markets. But these things are so interrelated. They're not separate. We find ourselves often in these spaces of seeking outside, of looking for the thing to tell us that we're okay. And I shared this in the last summit. John and I, about 3 weeks ago, we went walking to our favorite bookstore, and we love this bookstore so much. And typically, one of my MOs is to walk through the bookstore. I'll look at all the new nonfiction and pick out something. And then usually there's like, what's going on in the self-help section? And I have to say, I've spent my whole life looking for books in the self-help section. How do I improve myself? How do I uncover this? What are the analysis of my traumas and my pains? And how do I do this? And 3 weeks ago, we walked through the bookstore and I looked at John and I said, I don't need anything from this aisle right now. I'm okay. And he agreed. He was like, I don't need anything either. And that, my friend, I think is one of the most incredible moments to experience, is one where we are generating the vision of the life we want and not seeking it from others, or we are self-curious, self-interested, where we know ourselves deeply and we step away from the consciousness of selfishness and wanting things that other people have. If you have what you want and I have what I want, which I believe is entirely possible, and she has what she wants, and those people over there, maybe they have what they want. If we all really stopped and got quiet and listened deeply, we'd start to realize that we can all have what we want, that this world is big and abundant and juicy and beautiful. And if you know me well, like very well, you would know that one of my favorite ways to wind down and relax is to watch a nature show. Not only is it calming and soothing, but it is fascinating. I mean, to be able to see instinctually animals living in their greatness, their adaptations, how they move in the world. I mean, talk about amazing, right? Talk about fascination. This world is so big and beautiful. There is so much space here for us. There is so much love available to us. And there is so much that we can create once we get close enough to who we are and what it is that we are wanting. Now that we are officially out of year one, which is, again, I cannot believe this, it's time for us to think about what is next. And that is something that John and I are doing so actively. What is the next way in which we can build community in a way that feels authentic, in a way where all of you are inspired to be together, to be open and vulnerable and create change together, to break down silos, and in a way that allows you to pledge allegiance to yourself first and foremost, and then make next steps, and then make next decisions. And that is the world that we are building. I'm excited for these things to unfold. I'm excited for you to be with me along this journey. Thank you. Thank you for helping my dreams come true. Thank you for sharing your stories, for volunteering your insights, for joining me and convening with me at the dinners we host, at the summits we have, for being a part of something because it resonates deeply, that there is a different way, that you are whole, that we are not in competition, that we are in the truest essence of collaboration. And that is what it's going to be called for in this next era of the world we live in. My friend, the world is changing, and we get to hold hands and link arms and do it together. And ultimately, when we get to do it together, we get to have fun together. We get to get rich together, and we get to unlock our own personal legacies. And so I invite you to join me. Join John, join me, join what we're building, say yes. And I can't wait to see you. I can't wait to meet you. I can't wait to give you a big hug. We have so many fun and exciting things that are coming up this year. We're doing retreat around legacy and awakenings. We are aligning purpose with power. We're bringing in the most incredible facilitators, and we're continuing to do this work. And like I had mentioned in the download last year, we can't do it alone. This is about partnership. This is about collaboration. And so we need you. So I look forward to all of it unfolding. And I am grateful for you. And I cannot wait to drop in next and share everything else that has transpired. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Getting Rich Together. Please take a minute to subscribe. And if you like this episode, I'd love it if you could share it with a friend who is ready to elevate their financial future. Until next time, let's keep getting rich together.